This is The Strategic Leader, the podcast that helps people-focused leaders to think, act, and feel more strategic. And in this Series 5, we are exploring Tales from the Top Table. We're looking at the senior leadership team, what's involved in operating strategically in that team, and we've got both guests and our own perspectives to share, and we hope you find it useful. Welcome back to The Strategic Leader with me, Gemma Bullivant.
And with me, Fee Craig. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about a tension that arises fairly often, but we may not foresee it. And we've been talking quite a lot in this series about different hats that we might wear as we are sitting at that top table. And two of those hats, the one of functional leader, so you might be head of HR, head of finance, head of marketing, whatever it might be. You have that kind of position to defend. But you also have a hat that is enterprise level leader and somebody who is responsible for running this business. And as does everybody else around that table, you all have similar hats in that respect. But what happens when those two hats are conflicting? What happens when something needs to be decided or agreed upon around the table that is in direct conflict to your departmental goals, objectives, budgets, and so on? So where there's a tension between a decision that might compromise what you might prefer as head of your area, but needs to be made for the good of the business. We can see these trade-offs all the time. The question is how to tackle them.
It's a great topic. And I think there's also an additional one here around maybe there's two or more people around the table who have conflicting needs from a functional level and trying to figure out as a group what the enterprise solution or best path for the organization would be in that scenario. So whether it's your functional conflict with an enterprise-wide goal and you are aware of both of those, or whether there's two conflicting departmental heads who want things that are going to pull in opposite directions, we're going to really sort of dig into that today, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, in your experience, which do you think are the two departments that would be at odds with each other most of the time? If we had to make a massive broad brush generalization, what would you say are the departments that would?
Well, I mean, not to put finance in the stocks, but
I knew you were
finance.
going to say finance.
Well, finance, to be fair, finance are there very much to hold accountability around cost and spend, as well as to grow. You know, there are two arms to a true finance leader, but there needs to be somebody who does hold the purse strings and who does put some robust challenge to any kind of spending. So any other leader that is going to suggest that investment is needed, budget is needed, some sort of, monetary or other type of ask is being made, then poor old finance is probably going to be the one that is expecting to say no. So
And
whether it's
yeah,
HR or whether it's marketing, whether it's,
exactly.
any of the
Finance
other.
faces off against everybody,
Yeah,
really. It's
yeah.
the obvious one. I was thinking exactly the same as finance, isn't it? Poor old finance boards are always in conflict with everybody. But there are,
For some
there
reason.
are broader conflicts in there. I mean, I know in my bracket there's conflicts between marketing and operations. Marketing have a genius idea about something they want to set up, and ops just can't support it. Or there's all kinds of conflicts that could come up. Have you come across any meaty examples of this in your long and illustrious career, Gem?
Well, I could dig right back into my old dinosaur days
Oh,
of
lovely.
setting recruitment, preferred suppliers and agencies, and the drive and the imperative that I would have been tasked with back in those days of really negotiating down the commission rates on the preferred supplier list to a point where it's questionable whether we actually then got the right kind of quality as a result of that. So if you think about it, a recruitment agent's probably got various different clients on their books and only a finite number of candidates. If I were them, I would be prioritizing who I think are my strongest candidates towards the ones that are likely to earn me a bit more money. I mean, that's fairly human nature. I don't think that's too unethical to suggest that that might be going on. And so there's a conflict there between meeting what are essentially some fairly straightforward budget asks to bring commission rates down and therefore spend down on a per head basis with actually what you get for your money.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And I think we will talk about the impact of that now,
Mm,
brings your budget down, and the impact of that maybe in 6 or 12 months' time. We'll definitely come on to talk about that idea of trade-offs. I can remember a really specific example back in my marketing days where we had actually, really conflicting departmental targets, even within marketing. The objectives for my part of the business and a different part of the marketing team were just in direct conflict with each other. And I don't remember ever thinking about this in any other way than just sort of head to head conflict. My part of the business was acquisition. It was my job to bring in a volume of people in the top of the sales funnel. And we had various tools that we could do that. And we knew that some of these tools, the customers would come in, but they wouldn't stick around. But they would still stick around for long enough for us to measure our targets. So they ticked all of our boxes. There was another team who were in charge of retention, how long people stay, how long they stay customers. And we were just creating problems for them because the more people we brought in from these sources that we knew weren't going to stick around, the more their retention targets became more and more challenging. And we didn't really, I don't remember, I mean, this was a really long time ago, but I don't ever remember kind of going, well, how do we address this together? What are we actually trying to achieve? And this kind of sits at the heart of this, which is does this team exist? Does this business exist to bring people into the top of the funnel and for them to drop out within 3 months? No, the business doesn't exist for that purpose. So my targets were in isolation were actually useless.
mm,
The business exists to be profitable, and we are profitable by having customers that stick around for up to 2 years and longer. And the biggest indicator of them sticking around for 2 years is that they stick around for 3 payments, which means we should be working together, acquisition and retention, to make sure we get to that 3 payment point. And our
mm,
targets should be kind of integrated and blended and work. We should be working together. We've got sort of 2 levers to pull, the acquisition lever and the retention lever, to make sure that everybody that we bring in, as many people as possible who will stick for more than 3 months, to kind of combine those targets. But they weren't combined. I don't recall them ever being combined. So we had these 2 conflicting targets, even within one department, which was marketing. And that must happen quite a lot, particularly at top team level. We must have conflicting KPIs, conflicting objectives. And then the question becomes, do I defend my part of the business, or do I just go with what everyone else is saying, or what finance is saying, or what the company needs, to the detriment of my part of the business? That's the query that we're going to be unpacking today. So, I mean, we've mentioned a couple of things that we can think about. We've got a number of things for you to consider if you're facing the situation yourself, or you think that other people in your leadership team might be facing this situation. What can we do about it? What are ways of thinking about this situation? So, Jem, do you want to kick us off with the first of our ideas? What's a
mm.
useful way of thinking about this conundrum?
Absolutely. I think the first one is probably going to come as no surprise to regular listeners and practitioners of
Is
our
it is it
strategic.
a is it a full part model? Is it like a full box model?
No,
Oh,
surprisingly, but it is quite simply, and it's speaking to something that you did in your description just there, is to lift above it, take the helicopter view, and really look at it from the purpose and what it is that we're trying to achieve. So in your example, you were saying, are we here to bring in as many people as any new customers as possible, regardless of whether they drop out of the funnel within the first 3 months? No, we're here to find customers that stick. I adding to what you described, but
mhm.
we are here to that overarching, that helicopter view. is when you get really stuck in your own metric or your own functional area, your own reason for being, is to say, okay, let's lift up. Let's look at this from 30,000 feet and really think about what it is that we're trying to achieve here. So that
So,
strategic perspective.
yeah, so looking higher at the organizational strategy, the organizational purpose or vision, and saying how, what's the best decision to make here? Is it about cost now and lower quality later, or is it about something else? Can we take it a layer up and look at the overarching thing that we're trying to achieve and make sure the decision we make meets that overarching need rather than the decision that's right in front of us?
Mm. Now, just on your example, the acquisition versus retention, a somewhat, devil's advocate or provocative perspective on this, let's say a CEO who can see an opportunity in this conflict might be sitting and looking at that and saying, I want you to both do all you can, because what you're doing as the acquisition team is to bring people in who could be retained. And then I want the retention team to really do all of that they can to retain them. So I don't actually want to switch those two things off. I want them to have that tension. I think the trick there is to agree that that tension exists and
Yeah.
that that tension actually is there to drive healthy, strong, better outcomes as a result of it.
And I think that's a really important point because that kind of tension, that conflict is always going to be there. And the higher you get up a business, the more frequent and the more fundamental those
Mm.
conflicts can be. So we're not shying away from that. We're saying, well, let's
Mm.
acknowledge what is there and let's explore. And I guess that brings us on to one of the points. I'm going to go in a slightly different order than we had planned, Jen. But what that does is kind of saying, is it like my perspective or your perspective? There's a tension between these two things. Is it
Mm.
acquisition or is it retention? Is it cost saving or is it quality? And saying, well, actually, that is a dichotomy between two outcomes. And that means that if one person gets their way or one department gets their way, the other one has therefore lost. It's a kind of a zero sum game. If I use that term right, zero sum game. Anyway, I guess what we're saying is it can be very tempting to say it has to be this or this, and we get stuck in those two polarized
Mm.
opinions. The second thing that we want to offer to you is saying, what would a third solution be? What would a creative alternative be that kind of meets the needs of both of those things, but is neither? And this comes from the idea of being able to hold two things that are true, but conflicting at the same time, which is a great leadership skill because we want to try and tidy up our brains and have everything sort of neatly lined up in our brains. And that rarely happens. Things that are true and conflicting can both exist. And the trick is not to kind of get blindsided by just, well, it has to be one or the other. How can we think creatively about saying, well, what is different? What else could it be if it wasn't one of these things? But what are both things trying to achieve? And how could we achieve both of those things through a different way? So trying to look for a third way can be a helpful perspective on how to tackle this challenge when it comes up.
And it can be as creative or as straightforward as the situation needs. I mean, in your example, you mentioned the acquisition target and then the retention target, and that the acquisition target could be more clearly defined as, well, you're not hitting your targets unless you've acquired customers that stay for 3 months.
Uh-huh.
And then beyond that point, and therefore you've got a bit of a quality metric that's in there. I'm kind of diving into this from a bonus and reward lens because that's obviously
Uh-huh.
my world, but is adding a qualifying metric that enables you to meet the best of both worlds a little more easily. So sometimes it can be quite straightforward like that. Sometimes it actually requires deeper creativity to come up with an entirely different solution or avenue. I don't know if you've got any examples of that.
I don't know if it's a good example, but I was trying to hire an extra headcount, and because one of the guys in my team was overloaded, and I couldn't get the extra headcount, and it was either have the extra headcount but blow the budget, or don't have the extra headcount and blow the brains of the person who was doing too much work. And it was like, well, either or, either or. And then I suddenly had a brainwave and said, what if I ditched a part of my job, which was possible, to somebody else? We could freelance that bit out because we didn't sort of need that thinking all the time. And I picked up the extra. So that was like a third way, which wasn't immediately obvious and was almost counterintuitive because I was the team leader. But actually, I liked doing that kind of work. It was easy for me to do. And so that was the third way that we had took us a while to get to. But actually, that was a really good solution,
Mm, mm.
which
Yeah.
was not earth shattering, but it was,
Mm,
it was a good one. And it was like, well, that's a third way. It's true that we've got limited budget and it's true that he has got too much work. Though
mm.
we thought they were in conflict. But actually, there's a third solution. Once we ditched, how do we get the money or how do we give him more work? If we ditch those two positions and like, well, what else could we do?
Yeah.
We
I
got
think
to,
that's the key thing. I think that's the key thing. What else could we do here?
yeah.
So we might have two conflicting stances or needs or set of aims, and they could be very powerfully, very impactfully presented, positioned, lots of merits, lots of good reasons why both of those options would be good, but also equally lots of reasons why they can't both happen because they're in conflict. So let's move on to our third idea to help us to resolve conflicting aims and objectives. And the third area relates to perspective. What else could we do here may be helped along by shifting our perspective in some way. Sometimes what else could we do poses no immediate answers because we're still looking at it from our own perspective or each other's perspectives, aren't we?
Yeah.
And sometimes I think shifting that perspective to a third party can be really helpful to open up more ideas. What would our shareholders or our customers or our employees want us to do here? So almost lifting away from what I want to do or what you want to do or what we in this room want to do and really thinking about what other interested parties, observers, what other perspectives might there be to help us come up with some ideas, which can sometimes be quite challenging.
Oh, that's a really good one. And it's a technique you can use for lots of things called the empty chair. And you can do this physically because it really does help to do it physically if you are able to do that, which is simply get an extra chair, literally an extra chair around the table. And either you can say, well, imagine a customer was there, or imagine an employee was there in that chair, or imagine one of our shareholders, perhaps board of directors, whatever sort of sits outside the immediate group in the team. Or somebody in the team can play the role of that extra stakeholder and physically go and sit in the chair and go, right, I'm representing our customers now. I'm not representing head of finance or head of marketing or head of HR. I'm representing the voice of the customer or whoever you choose. And it will help you to have that conversation with that stakeholder in the room. It's a really powerful technique. It seems like it's not going to work, but it really, really does. So that's a really good suggestion. That idea about we're still looking at it from the lens of the people who are already in the room. It's like, let's bring in a lens of somebody outside of the room. That feels really powerful.
Mm. And this is also reminding me of the power of it disconnecting from emotion. So we touched on this in one of the previous episodes, didn't we? I think it was with Paul Kincaid on red and green traces. And the idea that if you can depersonalize a perspective, so something that you really passionately feel, I'm really passionate about my acquisition targets, and I get that you're really passionate about your retention targets, but this is my reason for being. This is who I am. This is what I do for this organization. By bringing in a third party perspective, you are having to disconnect from that emotional connection to that particular aim. And you're really being forced to think about this from an alternative perspective. And in this scenario, not a perspective that's in the room, which can also fuel emotion in the wrong way sometimes.
Yeah, and that does raise an interesting point, which is at what point, no matter how rational and professional we want to be, we think we're being, at what point do we get entrenched in our defensive position and it becomes me versus you? That's such an easy road to go down, which is, this is my team, these are my targets, this is my professional reputation, these are my departmental KPIs. At what point do we have to notice the role that the ego is playing here and go, okay, what would it mean for me personally if I let go of all of those things and go, okay, I'll do something else. It won't be popular in my team. We'll miss our targets, da da da. But actually, I understand the reason why we're doing it. So just checking that we haven't become entrenched emotionally in that
Mm,
position where it would be better to put the ego to one side and take a decision for the benefit of the group.
mm. What's interesting about that, of course, is that I don't know about you, Fee, but I tend to come across coaching clients who have the opposite challenge to that, which is that they don't feel they hold their boundaries strongly enough, hold their position strongly enough, usually feel like they're the first one to roll over, the first
Mhm.
one to, you know, stand aside or step aside for somebody else's needs. So, as well as there being this need to hold the tension of your own ego and not wanting to push it through at all costs, there is a counter to that, which is, am I holding my position firmly enough in this situation and in the balance and in the round? Is that the right thing for me to be doing here?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point, a really good balance to be striking. Good
Mm,
ads there. Let's think of another perspective. Let's talk about trade-offs. The most obvious place we're probably going to go to firstly when we have a conflicting conflict is if I have to give up my budget on this for cost-cutting reasons or because the budget has to go to someone else, then this project won't be delivered or it will be delayed. So they're kind of if then trade off. So if I don't get to recruit the number of people that I need to recruit, then the volume of work won't get done. So it's that trade off of understanding it's not just, okay, I won't get that. I won't get that budget. I won't get that time, whatever the decision is. It's like saying, well, this is the impact of that decision being made and making sure that everyone is aware of that. And these have been scoped out, thinking about scenario planning to say, well, look, this is what we could give up in order to find that extra budget. Which one are we going to give up? Because, often it's one that people go, we don't want to give up any of them. And then what we sometimes get is what we actually give up is our work life balance because the
mhm,
answer is we can't give any of them up. We still have to deliver them all, but for less money. So there is always a trade off in there. And it's like looking at those trade offs pragmatically and bringing those to the surface. So the if then trade offs, but then also a really nice kind of provocative one that we can bring when it feels like we might be looking at things through a short term lens. It would be if we do this thing now, whatever this thing may be, cutting budgets or changing our strategy on this or cancelling a project, whatever it is. If we do this thing now, what is the impact going to be in 12 months' time? What will this look like in the future? So coming forward and look at, again, it's a different perspective to look through, but coming forward a year or whatever feels like a reasonable time frame and looking back, what are we dealing with in a month, in a year's time that is caused by this decision here? And taking that perspective to make sure we're stress testing that decision so that we're not just kicking the can down the road. I mean, that's that expression in a T, isn't it? Which is we'll
mm,
solve it now, we'll save the budget now, but we are creating problems for ourselves further down the line, which means more of these kinds of conversations. So just
mm.
bringing those trade-offs to the surface in a way that's pragmatic and helps you understand the impact of those decisions,
Yeah.
even the impacts that
And
are not 100% obvious.
yeah. And that future focus is a strategic pillar, isn't it?
It
That
is.
idea of what will happen, not right now. We might be solving this right now to your point, but what will happen in the future as a result of this, or what is likely to happen in the future as a result of this decision? These are points that need full exploration, and these are sometimes, just to go back to our lovely friends in finance, these are sometimes the ways that we can have these conversations that say, yes, I can see that the budget line would work better if we find these savings here. But what we need to also consider is what the impact might be in 6 months, 12 months, 2 years down the line in relation to these decisions. And then we can have a conversation that then acknowledges that we have to do this now, and there are no creative alternative back to the drawing board solutions, and we do need to do this, but it has to be a considered and in the round perspective, rather than I win this particular argument, you can win the next one type of thing.
Yeah, and I think that also sets yourself up for saying we accept the fact that we will probably therefore face these problems down the line. And so when they do happen, it's not like, oh my God, this amazingly surprising, awful thing has happened. It's like, well, we knew that was going to happen. Is there anything that we can do to mitigate it?
I've
So
lost
we've
my
talked
train.
about 4 different ways that we can think about this tension between conflicting KPIs within a leadership team and how to think about it, how to wrestle with it in your head, how to discuss it as a team. And I think what we're really looking for is this kind of professional position that we want to be holding, which is I am protecting and defending and doing the right thing by my team, but I am also considering what is the needs of the organization. I have to be able to have that systemic lens. What are the needs of the organization? And that has to override the needs of any individual department in the big picture at the end of the day, because that's why we're in that leadership team. That's why we're on that board of directors or that senior leadership team. It's to deliver the right thing for the business and the right thing. And that might not be the right thing for my team. It might be something that's quite different. So being able to kind of acknowledge those 2 hats and know which one to put on and when to sacrifice your team hat for the systemic organizational hat is a skill that might feel really quite counterintuitive, but one that sometimes is necessary, and still recognizing your point, Jem, that we still need to strike that balance and making sure we defend strongly, but know when rationally to say, actually, I'm going to have to give this up because I can see that it is the right thing for the organization. So a tricky one. It's quite conceptual, quite tricky to be in, quite tricky to think about. But hopefully that gives everybody some insight on what to do if you find yourselves facing this moment, which I think probably most people will at some point.
Great stuff. Thanks for that, Fee.
Thank you, everybody. Do keep getting in touch with us because we love hearing from you. And thank you for listening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Strategic Leader. We'd love it if you could subscribe or maybe share with a colleague or just leave us a quick review.
And if you have a big, hairy question you'd like us to explore, or perhaps a strategic dilemma you're wrestling with, just drop us a line, gemma@gemmabullivant.co.uk.
And remember, having a strategic viewpoint doesn't necessarily mean having all the answers. It's more about asking better questions, broadening your view, and staying curious.
We'll see you next time.